After decades of discord, the United States and Cuba have made strides in recent years at forging a new bond. But two controversial cases involving the imprisonment of Cuban secret agents and a USAID contractor has ignited a fiery debate that threatens to resurrect old animosities. Our man in Havana, Michael Voss, traveled across the borders to bring us the story of the Cuban Five and American Alan Gross.
Cuba, the only communist state in the Western Hemisphere and right on America's doorstep. This Caribbean island has long felt under siege, from the attempted invasion at the Bay of Pigs to the US trade embargo, which continues to this day. It's like a time warp stuck in the Cold War. The issue that best encapsulates the dysfunctional relationship between the two countries is the fate of 6 prisoners. One, an American aid contractor caught working undercover here in Havana, and 5 Cuban intelligence officers being held in the United States. They're called the Cuban Five. They're on billboards everywhere and are considered national heroes.
Viva Cuba Libre!
They were convicted in Miami in 2001 of conspiracy to commit espionage and given sentences ranging from 15 years to double life. Cuba admits they were intelligence agents, but says they were not spying on the US government. Instead, they were monitoring extremist anti-Castro exile groups in Miami with a history of deadly terror attacks against Cuba.
Our relatives were the eyes and ears of the Cuban government there in Miami.
Elizabeth Palmero is the wife of one of the Cuban Five, Ronaldo Labañino, who's serving a 30-year prison term.
There is a double standard in the way the American government treats the case of the Five or the case of Cuba in the war on terror and the case of other countries.
In the 1970s, a Cuban airliner was blown up over the Caribbean, killing all 78 people on board. Later, as Cuba started to open its doors to tourists, there was a bombing campaign against hotels and restaurants there. An Italian tourist died. Light aircraft out of Miami also flew into Cuban airspace, dropping anti-Castro leaflets over Havana. The Cuban Air Force shot down 2 of those planes, killing all 4 Cuban Americans on board, an incident which led to the eventual arrest and trial of the Cuban Five. The campaign to free the Five is spearheaded by Politburo member and president of Cuba's National Assembly, Ricardo Alarcón.
The U.S., historically speaking, throughout the half a century, had been using 2 main tools to try to change the Cuban regime, to use a fashionable wording. The economic pressure and violence, and specifically terrorism.
The Five were government agents who were sent to Florida to spy in the United States, and they were caught. If you're a spy and you were caught, surely you should be prepared to accept the consequences.
Spying had a very specific meaning, is getting secret documents related to the national security or military matters of the United States. They were not accused of spying, they were accused of conspiracy to commit espionage. But they were sentenced to the maximum penalty possible for espionage, not just for conspiracy.
Then there's Alan Gross, a 63-year-old American aid contractor who's serving a 15-year jail sentence in Cuba for acts against the state. At his trial in Havana, he was accused of illegally installing secure satellite internet systems in local synagogues. It was part of a program financed by the US government's International Development Agency, USAID. Local Jewish leaders, though, told the court that they were unaware of his activities. Why is Alan Gross serving 15 years for what the US administration says was providing improved internet access to Jewish communities here.
It was not going to a synagogue to help the poor, abandoned Jews. That's nonsensical. That's poor propaganda to try to distort the realities. And he said what he was bringing was not a book, was not literature, was sophisticated technological communication equipment that are not available in the normal trade.
With the end of the Cold War came a marked shift in US policy towards countries like Cuba. Congress started allocating resources to promote democracy. According to the Obama administration, such programs are simply aimed at encouraging political change by offering support to dissidents and civil society groups. But the Cubans see it as yet another attempt at regime change. Phil Peters is a Cuba analyst at the Lexington Institute, a Virginia-based conservative think tank specializing in national security and public policy. His blog, The Cuba Triangle, monitors and comments on developments on the island. Was this a covert operation? Was he undercover in Cuba installing this equipment?
Well, he wasn't covert in the sense that he hid his identity. He went in as Alan Gross and with his own passport. USAID likes to use the word that the programs are run discreetly, but I mean it's a covert operation in the sense that not in the sense that he worked for the CIA, not in the sense that he hid his own identity, but covert in the sense that he went in as a tourist on a tourist visa and attempted to carry out this U.S. government program and install this equipment and work with various Cubans on this program, which is actually intended to change the political order in Cuba, and to do so without being detected. So in that sense, it's a covert program. Yeah.
But no suggestion that he was spying or into espionage or anything like that?
In fact, I mean, heaven help us if he were a spy. I mean, because I don't think that any intelligence agency, the United States or any other country, would send someone in to carry out intelligence work that doesn't know the country and doesn't know the language.
How has the U.S. administration reacted to his arrest?
Well, I think the U.S. government's reaction has been to simply demand his release immediately and unconditionally.
Former President Jimmy Carter flew to Havana in an attempt to free Alan Gross, but left empty-handed, and the Cuban Supreme Court has upheld his conviction. Alan Gross is currently being held at this military hospital in Havana. He's lost about 100 pounds in weight since his arrest in December 2009. His wife, Judy Gross, attended his trial and has visited him in jail. She's since appealed to President Raul Castro to free him on humanitarian grounds. Alan Gross's wife has appealed for him to be allowed to return home to visit his 90-year-old mother who's dying of cancer. One of the five, Rene Gonzalez, was able to come back to Cuba to visit his brother in similar circumstances. Why won't you let Alan Gross go?
Circumstances are not similar, are absolutely have no similarity. Rene Gonzalez is not a prisoner. Rene Gonzalez served completely his 15 years in prison, is out of prison under certain conditions. He's what they call a supervised release. While Mr. Gross is beginning serving his terms of imprisonment.
Several people in both the United States and Cuba have raised the possibility of resolving this issue with a prisoner swap. Is it something you've approached the US administration about?
The US administration knows very well our position. We think that the five should be free because they are innocent. They did nothing wrong against the US people or the US society. That's one thing. We recognize the humanitarian dimension of Mr. Gross' situation, but we also have very strong and deep concerned about the humanitarian dimension of the situation of the five.
Is there any indication at all that the US administration is prepared to sit down and talk to the Cubans about this, even through back channels?
Well, I've seen none, and certainly the public statements on the part of the United States government are extremely consistent, which is simply to demand his release unconditionally.
Some of those in the Jewish community who went to Cuba to visit him have floated the idea of a swap with the 5 Cubans who are serving jail sentences here in the United States. Is there any sign or any indication at all that this could be on the cards?
No, there's no sign whatsoever of any negotiation that's going on. And frankly, I think some kind of negotiation has to take place. You know, it's not a loss of honor when a country sends an operative into another country covertly, and that person gets caught. In the case of Israel, Israel recently traded 1,000 Palestinian terrorists that were in their jails for the return of a single Israeli soldier. So it's not unheard of, and it's not this is just the way it's done.